Hey, I'm Greg Moran from the Founder's Journey podcast. Next edition here of the Founder's Journey Insights, specifically recorded for our newsletter subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, hope you jump over to Twitter, go to my profile, and you can subscribe right there. This week, we're talking about the future of work. And the future of work is here today. There's four really big pillars when we think about, at least when I think about the future of work. The first is around automation. And AI and machine learning really moving from what has been largely a cliche or very generic terms into really robotic based automation, whether that's literal robots or it's more technology based robots automating business service or business process and marketing automation and financial automation, things like that. In a recent World Economic Forum survey, they estimated that over the next 3 to 5 years, this is not a long time frame we're talking about, 50% of global jobs will be subject to automation. That has massive societal and governmental and political repercussions that are really unlike anything we've ever seen. Governments have to upskill, they've got to reskill. Companies need to think about how to reposition large groups of their labor force from what have been manual work that, think of distribution and things like that have largely been manual over to more automated workforce, which means a large displacement, again, a large upskilling, a large reskilling. The second area that's really part of the future of work is the globalization of the workforce. And what I mean, globalization is a really loaded term. We've all heard this. I'm sure there's people listening to this that are, very for globalization and very against globalization. But really, when we talk about globalization of the workforce, it means that our labor markets, the markets that we're recruiting in for our companies, are now shifting from local or regional or national markets really to truly global labor markets. So what does that mean for a startup? Well, it means that you can start to recruit world-class talent literally anywhere on the globe. And because of other forces that are at play that we'll get into in a second, start to recruit that talent, bring them into your organization, experience potentially even some cost arbitrage, again, from cost of living standards between one country and another, but really have access to a whole different caliber of talent than they may have had access to before. If you're not in one of the major tech hubs, say in the United States or around the world, really what this does is it gives you access to talent either in those tech hubs or allows the migration of people in those tech hubs to start to work for companies anywhere. So talk about globalization of the workforce, that's really where it is. The other main pillar is the freelancing of work. Right now, about 36% of US workers participate in the gig economy, and that's about 31% when you look at it on a global level. It is massively accelerating. Over the next decade, and some surveys have this as low as 5 years, the majority of the US workforce will be freelance. Now, again, this has massive impact on a society and it creates massive business opportunity. Just think about getting a mortgage, right? And how many things are tied to a traditional W-2 in the United States or the relevant sort of, work proof in another country. And to get basic loans, to get to buy a home, to buy a car, these things are really tied back in many cases to proving that we work in a traditional work environment. Well, when the majority of people are not in a traditional work environment, things need to change. That creates opportunity for entrepreneurs. And the last is one we all know, because we've all been impacted by it over the last 2 years, is remote work. And, what really happened was this was a trend that was moving slower, certainly, over the last decade. And COVID basically took this trend that was already taking place and then condensed it into, about 2 weeks. And, now we're all working remotely, or most of us are working remotely. Again, this creates massive opportunities for startups to look at reducing their fixed overhead, reduce their office space, but also it requires a conscious effort because we still need to bring humans together. We are still humans. We're not going to live our lives by Zoom. At least I hope not. And the being thoughtful about how we build a culture and how we bring people together for that human-human contact that we all need, but it really becomes more quality versus quantity time. And I think, successful companies will really get good at bringing people together, doing it in remote ways, doing it in a fun way, but doing it in a way where we're really extracting the highest quality of the time that we're spending together. So many ways that a startup can benefit from this. If you're a founder, if you're a startup leader today, from automation, just think about how you drive efficiency. Think about things like no-code development, business process automation. And also think about reducing your customer acquisition cost through automation, through sales efficiency, digital conversion tools, a lot of ways to be able to do this that really can have a material impact on your financials. If you look at, from a recruiting standpoint, from a global labor standpoint, really think about opening up that recruiting aperture beyond the local, regional, and national market, and really start to recruit globally in remote areas, specifically in those areas where autonomy is part of that role. Also think about reducing fixed costs, right? When we start to think about freelancers, reducing fixed costs and increasing the use of freelancers and really getting creative with this. I think a lot of times we limit freelancers and the use of freelancers to certain things that are, pretty well known today, development in certain areas, maybe some call center, graphic design, think about that, but really look at your upcoming headcount and really think creatively about if freelancers can start to come into that mix. And the other thing that this really requires is thinking about freelancers differently and not having an us versus them. Oh, you're one of us, or you're an outsider, you're a freelancer, you're a contractor, you're not one of us, but really including them in the culture. And then finally, from a remote work standpoint, look at internal WeWork kind of setups. And we're seeing companies do this really successfully today, building out regional spaces that are small, but really conducive to human, in-person meetings, strategy sessions where you can have some fun in really interesting locations. Lots of ways that you can do this because you can bring down that fixed overhead. So future of work, huge topic, probably the largest area of societal disruption today, certainly on an economic level. These are things just to start down the path, and so much more to come on this. Last, we're pre-releasing today, as I sit here and record this, the NASDAQ is down about 600 points in the US. The Dow is down about 1,000 points in the US. There is probably a pretty high probability that many of the people listening to this are going to experience the first real economic down cycle in over a decade. I've been through these before. They're not fun and they do require preparation. So I put together a guide that I'm pre-releasing to newsletter and podcast subscribers called the 50 Ways to Prepare Your Startup for an Economic Downturn. It's free. Send me a DM on Twitter at EvergreenMEP. Send me an email, however you want to reach me, and I will, and through LinkedIn as well. Send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to respond with a link to the guide for you, again, at no cost. Again, Greg Moran, Founders Journey Podcast, and this is the next edition of the Founders Journey Insight, built exclusively for our newsletter subscribers. Thanks. Have a great week.